side of life.
Hi, I'm Harry Marks, and this is Let's All Go to the Lobby, your introduction to the film you're about to watch. Our next film features Jimmy Stewart as a naive and idealistic politician just trying to do right, while the government machine plots against him for their greedy plans. This is Mr. Smith Goes to Washington from Frank Capra and Columbia Pictures in 1939. This film was based on an unpublished story by Lewis R. Foster that went by many titles, including The Gentleman from Montana and The Gentleman from Wyoming. But once Capra was signed on to direct, he intended it to be a sequel to our last picture, Mr. Deeds Goes to Town, aptly titled Mr. Deeds Goes to Washington. Capra's original idea had Gary Cooper reprising his role of Longfellow Deeds, with Jean Arthur back as Babe Bennett. Arthur stuck around, albeit in a new role, but Cooper was busy with another project, and so the part of Jefferson Smith went to the director's second choice, Jimmy Stewart. Before Columbia snatched up the rights to the original story, both MGM and Paramount had sent it in to Joseph Breen, the head of the Hayes office, for him to have a look at it. And Breen wasn't happy. He pushed back on the studios, citing, quote, "the generally unflattering portrayal of our system of government, which might well lead to such a picture being considered, both here and more particularly abroad, as a covert attack on the democratic form of government." I guess the last thing the government wanted was to be portrayed in a realistic light. But Breen wound up changing his tune after reading the completed script. He called it, quote, "a grand yarn that will do a great deal of good for all those who see it." It makes sense he'd see it that way, because the film lionizes the filibuster, Stewart's hours-long speech to stop a corrupt appropriations bill from coming to a vote. When the filibuster is wielded by a hero like Jefferson Smith, it's a tool of necessity and honor, but in our modern-day political climate, it has become a way to stifle democracy. But Mr. Smith Goes to Washington doesn't take sides. There is no Democrat versus Republican. In fact, neither party is mentioned at all. It's just David versus Goliath, one man and his principles against an unprincipled governing body. And despite its sentimentality, it still evokes a sense of patriotism and can-do inspiration even in today's modern, skeptical audiences. So much so that Capra himself continued for years to receive thankful letters from men and women who had entered politics after watching his film. Stewart knew how big Mr. Smith would be while he was making it. He saw it as his launchpad to the Hollywood A-list, and so he made sure he took every precaution during production. For example, he would drive himself to the studio at 5 o'clock every morning at a slow, reasonable speed. He felt that if he drove too fast, something bad might happen to him. And Mr. Smith Goes to Washington was a big, important film when it came out, one that was almost universally reviled by the Washington press corps, along with several U.S. senators. Montana Senator Burton Wheeler, who had been seated next to Capra during the premiere, stormed out halfway through, angry at how the director had portrayed American politics. Capra called the response from Washington, quote, "the worst shellacking of my professional life." And so here it is, starring Jimmy Stewart, Jean Arthur, Claude Rains, and Edward Arnold, from director Frank Capra and Columbia Pictures. This is 1939's Mr. Smith Goes to Washington.